You wanted to talk about why CFD is out here in the trees. Why are you in White Castle?
Well, we actually thought about it long and hard before we came here. This being so far from home for us, it was definitely, a stretch of our resources and our volition. But we chose this place because we felt it was the most critically important place for us to be this year. Last spring we were talking about all the different things that were going on, all the different threats to forest, and there were a lot of them. There was the loafer timber sale towards Crater Lake. There were a lot of bad things going on. Trapper was back on the cutting block, but we'd also been talking a lot about the ONC lands in CFD and the upcoming bill that at that point hadn't even, was still a gleam in DeFazio's eye. But the governor had just had his timber panel, and there was also hints that Wyden might be putting forward his own legislation. By June, he was starting to talk about an ONC framework that might be based on pilot projects in Oregon. So we knew that the Norman Jerry, Science Roadshow was something that we had to keep an eye on. White Castle is a variable retention harvest designed by Norman Jerry, specifically in response to the request from policymakers, DeFazio and Wyden, to demonstrate what a variable retention harvest looks like in a mature forest.
Can you define what a variable retention harvest is?
It's where when you leave little clumps of trees around the edge of your clear cut so that you can say, look, there's still some forest here. It's more like a natural forest. Look, there's big empty swaths of desolation and clumps of trees. Which, if you've been in the forest, as you can see, it's actually not like this forest at all. And this forest is a native forest. I don't know why you would need to make it more like a native forest, because it's exactly what a native forest is. It burned 110 years ago, so it's a great example of variegated canopy. We've got 350-year-old trees here. We've got 110-year-old trees here. We've got a lot of different kinds of trees here. It's a great place. But back to why we chose White Castle real quick. There were these three different threats coming at us, right, regarding the ONC lands. There was the governor's timber panel. There was the DeFazio ONC House bill that was going to privatize, 2.6 million acres of BLM land and put half of it in a trust to be managed for maximum yield logging. And then there was the Wyden's framework that was probably going to take this variable retention harvest idea and map it out over that 2.6 million acres so that you wound up with, death by 1,000 paper cuts instead of like half of it being just one big clear cut. You wind up with these, massive clear cuts everywhere spread out by little clumps of trees to mimic a native forest. In the meantime, everybody in Oregon is sitting there trying to figure out, well, which way should we go? It's a shell game, right? You just got to pick the right one, and you got to keep your eye on the ball and find the one with the most trees behind it and pick the right one. And people are so busy trying to figure out which plan is best, they don't realize that the person moving these shells on this table is the timber industry. And none of these serve the people of Oregon or the forest. So we came to White Castle partly because we wanted to save this beautiful forest, but also because we wanted to draw attention to the fact that Wyden's framework, based on Norman Jerry's variable retention harvest plan, was just another piece of this greater shell game that's all about taking Oregon's forests and putting them in service of a very small group of people who own the timber industry.
And why tree sitting for you?
I like direct action in general. Like anything that has like a physical presence of getting in the way more than just a information type or those are important. Or it's kind of like that whole thing about like you're in the way, and you're just there. Don't do this. I think I have a more succinct answer for you as to why tree sitting.
Good.
The view.
Alright, so in the White Castle variable retention harvest, there are certain like islands of mature trees left as reserves. Some of them are very small, like here's just a clump of trees that's a reserve. Others are fairly large. This one seems to be pretty large. You can follow the splotches on trees marking the boundary of a reserve area, and this is actually like a line of trees that's somewhat thick that we're going to walk through. So we'll actually walk into this reserve and through it for a ways. You can see the orange markings on trees to the left and right of me also that kind of mark that you're walking into a reserve area. Now, the fact that there's a little clump of woods here is absolutely wonderful, but it doesn't detract from the fact that there's going to be a huge swath of clear cut heading away from me down the hill through these beautiful chinkapins and younger Doug firs. Some of these trees are obviously quite young. Others are, quite a few of the other ones are in the 110-year-old range that grew up right after the fire that came through here. That's why it's not all, 400-year-old Doug firs. This place burned. And that's one of the reasons why you see so many different kinds of tree growing up. It's not a big old, late successional hemlock forest, with a few yew trees. It's a young, healthy forest with a lot of diversity. And it's a great example of what fire does to a landscape over a long period of time.
White Castle was surveyed several years ago for the Retrieval. The Retrieval is a survey managed species according to the Northwest Forest Plan. They are predated or eaten by the northern spotted owl, and the Retrieval is very important to find out because they don't migrate or move their nest. Though when they find a tree similar to these and they establish a nest, they don't really move. So if you can find those nests, they're more stationary than the spotted owls who might move their nest. And so the data that was found for this area for White Castle was submitted to the BLM, though, and according to the Northwest Forest Plan, though, they would have to buffer out this area 10 acres per nest and one additional acre for each additional nest within that 10-acre buffer. And so theoretically, this majority of this area could be buffered out, though, and supposedly was buffered out. But the BLM said, no, this is a pilot project, though. We can circumvent this for science, and this is why we're still fighting this timber sale.
These banner trees were the first trees that we occupied when we came here last June. We chose this spot because it's right in the middle of their road plan, and would therefore be something that they definitely need to get out of the way in order to, complete their plan to log these 77 acres of native forest.
Yeah, this is one of the first sits that was established this past summer. With the two matching trees. There's two platforms over 150 feet off the forest floor. They're suspended independently with a connecting tarp, and so there's space for folks to cook and sleep up there. And from here, several traverses go out multiple directions, and these traverses are lines that attach to other trees within the sale. That way, if they were to attempt to log those trees, it would bring down the system, so it endanger the life of people who are up in the system. So it's important that folks know that those trees are attached to each other.
Norm was actually quoted in the High Country News, High Country Times, I think it is, talking about this particular timber sale. They did a piece on it last April, and he talked about, most of the old growth in Oregon being off the table and the new battle lines of the timber war being drawn in mature forest like this. Um, and I think that he's right. There won't ever be any more old growth in Oregon if we log all the trees that are between 80 and 110 years old, which is, what they call climax forest. I mean, that's when they've done like the most of their rapid growth and they start to like slow down in their growth rate. Or at least they're big enough to be, productive for a mill. So I think it's important that people start to think about forests for forest's sake and what kind of world we want to live in, because we really are at that point where, unless you want to live in a world full of malls and high-rise apartments and visit the tree museum on your vacation, we need to start doing things differently.
These forests do stand right next to people's homes and farms. So if they open them to logging, that is going to have a direct impact.
Definitely.
I want to talk about that for a minute.
Well, I mean, a big part of it, in this particular area is water quality. And this is a wet forest, and we're the headwaters of the Myrtle Creek watershed. And there was resistance from the community down the creek from us. There were over 50 signatures submitted in a comment to the BLM when this was still in the scoping phase, I believe, from North and South Myrtle Creek Road, saying, please don't log our watershed. We need this water for our farms and our animals. And the expectation that a forest like this is going to continue to store water the same way that it does now when most of it has been removed is also kind of a ridiculous expectation.
The sit started in White Castle last May, or was it June?
The very beginning of June.
June. And now we are in the last day of November, going into December, and the BLM has come out with a closure notice, and we're looking at a closure by December 24th.
That sounds about right, unless there's an appeal.
Right. And so that means that when the closure notice goes into effect, what happens to the tree sitters?
Well, theoretically, at any point after the closure goes into effect, the tree sitters are violating the closure. So, law enforcement might come out and choose to try to remove them from the trees so that logging could proceed.
And at that point, they would be arrested?
That is usually what happens when a law enforcement officer tries to get you out of a tree and you refuse.
We're also facing some very bad weather coming in.
True.
And they're planning on staying up here until they're actually dragged out, or the sale doesn't happen, if I remember correctly the way you explained it to me before.
We plan to be here until the trees are safe.